Perfect timing, Dad, my son's wife sneered as she threw my life's possessions into the trash. You're not needed anymore, Vernon. Get out. I stood there looking at 40 years of memories scattered on the street like garbage, smiled quietly, and pulled out my phone to make one call. 3 days later, they had 89 missed calls and were frantically searching for me. They thought they'd erased me from their lives. They had no idea what they'd just started. My name is Vernon Whitfield. I'm 71 years old, and for 34 years I worked as a certified fraud examiner. The last 14 of them running my own consulting firm that specialized in uncovering embezzlement inside family-owned businesses. The irony of that is not lost on me now. I retired 5 years ago, right around the time my wife, Margaret, was diagnosed with the illness that would take her 2 years later. Since she passed, I've lived alone in the house we built together on Larkspur Lane. The house I paid off with 4 decades of work at the hardware business. I started with nothing but a pickup truck and a line of credit. That business, Whitfield Hardware and Supply, grew into 3 locations across the county. When Margaret got sick, I started handing more of the day-to-day operations to my son, Daniel. I was grieving, exhausted, and honestly relieved to hand the keys to somebody I trusted. Daniel was 36 then, sharp with numbers, good with customers. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know his wife, Vanessa, had been quietly rewriting our family's future for over a year. It started small. I noticed it before I understood it, the way old habits from my career never really leave you. A missing folder from the filing cabinet in my study. A change in the locks on the second store that nobody mentioned to me. Vanessa suddenly handling the paperwork for family visits to the accountant, sitting in on meetings she used to skip. She'd smile at me over coffee and say things like, "You should really just relax, Vernon. Let the kids handle it now." Kids, Daniel was 36, Vanessa was 33. I was the one who'd spent 3 decades catching people like her for a living, and she was calling herself a kid to manage me out of my own family's business. 6 weeks before that Thursday on the curb, I drove to the second store to drop off a birthday gift for one of the employees who'd worked there since I opened it. The manager, a man named Curtis Boyle who'd been with us for 8 years, pulled me aside in the break room with a look on his face I recognized from depositions, the look of someone carrying something they were afraid to say out loud. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "did you know the store on Grant Avenue got sold?" I told him that was impossible. I still held 40% ownership across all 3 locations, for the trust I'd set up years earlier specifically to protect my interest no matter what happened to my health. Nothing could be sold without my signature. Curtis showed me a text from a regional distributor confirming a change of ownership paperwork filed 3 weeks earlier. My signature was on it. I never signed anything. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my reading glasses and a legal pad, the same way I used to before walking into a client meeting to deliver bad news, and I made a list. Every strange interaction over the past year, every missing document, every time Daniel had gone quiet when I asked a direct question about the business. By the time I finished, the legal pad had 4 pages of dates, names, and dollar figures, and my hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, the way they always got when I finally understood the shape of a fraud. I called an old friend the next morning, Marcus Delgado, a retired FBI financial crimes agent I'd worked alongside on 2 cases back in 2009. Marcus and I hadn't spoken in years, but fraud people find each other again eventually, the way old soldiers do. "Vernon Whitfield," he said when he picked up. "Tell me somebody's finally trying to rob you blind, because that's the only reason you'd call me on a Tuesday." I laughed, but it wasn't really funny. Marcus met me at a diner outside town 2 days later. I laid out everything, the forged signature, the missing store deed, the way Vanessa had slowly inserted herself into every financial conversation while quietly locking me out of others. Marcus listened the way he always had, without interrupting, taking notes on a paper napkin because that's just who he was. "Here's your rule," he told me before we left. "Act normal. Don't confront them yet. The second they know you're onto them, whatever paper trail exists gets shredded, literally or digitally, within the hour. You built cases like this for 30 years, Vernon. You know this. Let them think they're still winning." So I did. For the next 5 weeks, I played the role of the tired, slightly forgetful widowed father everyone seemed to want me to be. I let Vanessa refill my coffee and pat my hand at dinner. I nodded along when Daniel talked about streamlining operations. Inside, I was building a file that would have made my old clients proud. Marcus helped me pull public property records showing the Grant Avenue store had been quietly transferred to a shell LLC called Heartline Property Group, a company registered 8 months earlier. With Vanessa's maiden name buried 3 layers deep in the filing paperwork as an authorized agent. I found bank statements, subpoenaed through a lawyer Marcus recommended, showing over $214,000 diverted from Whitfield Hardware's operating account into that same LLC across 11 months. Disguised as consulting fees and inventory management services, there was no consultant. There was no inventory management company. There was just Vanessa moving my life's work into her own name, one wire transfer at a time. The worst part came 2 weeks before that Thursday. Daniel's assistant manager, a young woman named Priya Anand who'd always been kind to me, forwarded me a screenshot she said she'd stumbled across accidentally when Daniel left his laptop open in the break room. It was a text exchange between Daniel and Vanessa from 4 months earlier. Vanessa, he's going to figure it out eventually. We need him out of the house before the Grant Ave sale closes. Daniel, he just lost mom. Give it time. Vanessa, we don't have time. If he finds the LLC paperwork, we're finished. Once he's out, we control everything. The house is worth $340K alone. Sell it, add it to the fund, and we never have to worry about money again. Daniel, and if he says no, Vanessa, he won't have a choice. I read those words standing in my kitchen in the house I built, and something in me went very quiet and very cold. Not sad, past sad. I'd read confession texts in fraud cases for 30 years. I knew exactly what I was looking at. That Thursday, Vanessa called to invite me to family dinner at the house I still legally owned outright. I'd put it solely in my own name years earlier for tax reasons neither of them knew about. I said yes. I even brought a bottle of wine. When I pulled into the driveway, there were 3 garbage bags and 2 cardboard boxes sitting on the curb in the rain. Margaret's wedding china, the set I bought her for our 25th anniversary, was shattered inside a dumpster Vanessa had rented and placed at the end of the driveway. My clothes were in the bags. Margaret's wedding ring, the one thing of hers I kept in my nightstand and looked at some nights, was gone. Vanessa stood on the porch with her arms crossed, and that's when she said the words that started all of this. "Perfect timing, Dad. You're not needed anymore, Vernon." "Get out." Daniel stood behind her, silent, staring at his shoes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry, though God knows I wanted to. I set the wine bottle down on the porch railing, took one long look at 40 years of my life sitting in trash bags on the curb, and I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. It hurt more than almost anything in my life. I smiled because I already knew exactly how this story was going to end, and it wasn't going to end the way they thought. "This house is in my name, Vanessa," I said calmly. "Solely. I made sure of that back in 2019. You don't get to decide where I live." "That's not what our lawyer said," she snapped back, though her voice cracked just slightly on the word lawyer. "Then your lawyer lied to you," I said. "The same way you lied about Heartline Property Group. The same way you forged my signature on the Grant Avenue sale. The same way you told my son in writing that once I was out of this house, quote, we control everything." The color drained from both of their faces at the same time. "How?" Vanessa started. "I spent 34 years finding money that didn't want to be found," I said. "You should have picked a better hobby than fraud." I turned, got in my car, and made the one call I'd been waiting 5 weeks to make. Not to a lawyer, not yet. I called Marcus and I said 4 words. "It's time, move now." Vanessa's composure cracked fast after that, but I was already pulling out of the driveway. She started talking over herself, about how expensive raising 2 kids was, how Daniel's salary wasn't enough, how she'd only meant to borrow from the business until things stabilized, how none of it was supposed to hurt me. I heard it all secondhand later, because I didn't stay to listen. I had 89 missed calls waiting for me by the time I turned my phone back on 3 days later. And every single one of them came after the sheriff's department served notice at Whitfield Hardware's corporate office. 3 days. That's all it took once the machine I'd built quietly for 5 weeks finally started moving. I filed the police report for the forged signature and fraudulent property transfer, a felony in our state. I handed over the bank records to a detective who, coincidentally, had trained under Marcus years earlier. Whitfield Hardware's board, which still included 2 of my oldest business partners, voted unanimously to remove Daniel as general manager pending investigation once they saw the paper trail. The Grant Avenue sale was frozen by a court order within 72 hours, and the Heartland Property Group LLC was flagged for a forensic audit that eventually traced every diverted dollar. Vanessa was charged with forgery and grand theft. Daniel, though he hadn't directly signed anything, was charged as an accessory once investigators found messages showing he'd known about and helped conceal the transfers. He avoided prison through a plea deal, probation, restitution, and mandatory financial counseling. But he lost his position at the company I built, and it will likely be years, if ever, before the board considers giving him any authority again. Vanessa received 18 months, of which she served 11, along with an order to repay the full $214,000 plus interest over the next decade. The house on Larkspur Lane is still mine. I moved back in the week after the dumpster incident, once the police had documented everything as evidence. I keep Margaret's ring in a small wooden box on my nightstand now. Priya, of all people, found it 2 days later, still sitting in the bottom of a garbage bag at the county transfer station, and drove 40 minutes out of her way to bring it back to me herself. I gave her a raise the same week the board reinstated my full oversight of the business. My grandchildren, Daniel's kids, still visit me on Sundays. That relationship survived, even if others didn't. I made sure they understood, gently, in words a child can hold on to, that what happened wasn't their fault, and that loving someone doesn't mean pretending you didn't see what they did. Daniel and I speak occasionally now, careful, formal conversations, the kind you have with someone you're still learning how to trust again. Vanessa and I don't speak at all, and I've made my peace with that. Some bridges you don't rebuild. You just make sure you're standing on solid ground on your own side of the river. People ask me sometimes if I regret spending 5 weeks pretending I didn't know, sitting across from my son and his wife at that dinner table, smiling while I already held the evidence that would end their version of the future they'd planned. I don't. Patience wasn't weakness. Patience was the last case I ever built, and it was the most important one of my career. Blood may be thicker than water, but it has never once been thicker than evidence. And the truth doesn't disappear just because someone throws it in a dumpster in the rain. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real family stories like this one. Thank you for watching.